Dr. Rania Masri is an Arab-American writer, human rights activist. She's an assistant professor at the University of Balamand in Lebanon. Her research and activism has centered on environmental justice, civil rights, anti-war Iraq, and anti-occupation Palestine, and anti-apartheid Israel. She is also told me that she is going to accept a position at the American University of Beirut when she returns to Lebanon in several weeks. Ms. Rania, happy to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be among friends and family. Though every time I come back to North Carolina, I wish I were talking about something else, like trees. You know, we say the word peace and we continue to say the word peace. And I have to say, for me as an Arab, for me as somebody who considers myself emotionally, politically, spiritually, ideologically Palestinian, the word peace has gotten to be quite offensive. Truly quite offensive. I'll say I don't want peace. I completely don't want peace, because peace is translated for my community as being we die silently. And we don't want to die silently. We actually have a very strange request. We want to live. And we want to live with full human rights. Full human rights. We do not want anyone to compromise on our human rights. And this sounds revolutionary. It sounds radical. And it shouldn't be. And when I say we want our full human rights, that's truly what it means. So when we look at what is actually happening in Gaza, what's happening in the West Bank, what's happening elsewhere, it's essential to realize that everything that has been happening to Gaza is simply exemplary of Zionism. It is not an exception. It's not that what is happening against the Palestinians in Gaza has not happened in the West Bank, or has not happened in Jerusalem, or has not happened in Jaffa and Haifa and in Lid and other parts of our land. It is simply exemplary in Gaza. 80% of the Palestinians in Gaza are not from Gaza. That's why I reject referring to them as Gazans. They are Palestinians. 80% of them come from villages in 1948. They are refugees. When we look at what Zionism has been demanding of Palestinians in Gaza, very clear, and the cries for this over the past few years, and especially over the past few months, have reached historic levels in Israel. They're openly calling for ethnic cleansing, using that language of ethnic cleansing, openly calling for genocide. There was an article that was published twice in the Times of Israel entitled, "Genocide is Permissible." Now, for a community to openly be calling for such things means that it has gone beyond even the shame of justifying murder and truly an acceptance of justifying murder. And for them to do this means that they have truly embraced racism. We have become in their eyes exactly what Menachem Begin said that we were, which is cockroaches, monsters on two legs. This is how much they have dehumanized Palestinians. And I also object to another narrative that is presented in the US media, which is this focus on the death of Palestinian children. And yes, our children have been killed. More than 430 of our children have been killed in the past 29 days. And it's true, children are innocent, but so are our women. And they focus on our women, and they separate our women from our men, and I refuse that separation of our women from our men, not just as a feminist, but also because it implies that killing our men is acceptable. And it's not acceptable. And then they present that 85% of the 1,900 Palestinians that have been killed thus far in Gaza are civilians. True. But that doesn't mean the remaining 15%, is my math correct? The remaining 15% is acceptable. Because the remaining 15%, and I have to say this openly and clearly, are the bravest, most courageous of our men. And I support them and I salute them. And their death is a murder. If we recognize that Palestinians require the full human rights that every other community demands, then we recognize that it is their right to defend themselves. Not only to defend themselves against Israeli bombs and F-16s and missiles from land, air and sea. Not only that, but it becomes secondary, in my opinion, to talk about who launched what first. Did the rockets come from Gaza before or after the Israeli bombardment? Because even if the Palestinian resistance launched the first rockets, which they did not, but even if they did, it would not legally be a provocation. It would legally be a retaliation. We need to recognize that. It would be a retaliation because an occupied population has the right to use any means necessary according to international law to defend itself. So that includes launching rockets. So I will not apologize for those rockets. I will not apologize for the tunnels. I stand here and I say, I am proud of our men that have fought, just like I am proud of our men in Lebanon that fought and beat the Israeli military in 2006. That is the context that I'm presenting this in. And that is the context that we need to strive for. And that is the context that the Palestinian resistance in Gaza have shown us. Because even though one of the objectives of the Israeli military was to break the Palestinian resistance, they failed in doing so, just as they failed to break the Lebanese resistance in 2006. They have excelled in doing what they know how to do since 1948. They know how to kill, they know how to destroy, but they have failed in breaking the spirit of the Palestinians. They have failed in doing that. And I say that not out of ideology and spirituality and rhetoric. I say that because when you look at the demand that has come out of Palestinians in Gaza, it has not been a white flag. It has not been, please stop killing us. It has been a ceasefire only with the ending of the siege. They did not say stop the bombs. They said treat us with dignity and end the siege. Because the only difference between the siege and the bomb is the rate and intensity of the murder. All of us who were active in the 90s against the sanctions on Iraq recognize that the sanctions on Iraq killed more children than the American bombs on Iraq. They killed 5,000 children every month, and we oppose that. It is with that same vehemence that we need to oppose the siege on Gaza. And we need to recognize that the siege on Gaza did not begin in 2005, nor in 2006. Gaza became fenced off, literally fenced off, in 1993. 1993. What happened in 1993, if anyone remembers? Oslo. The wall around Gaza was built before the apartheid wall in the West Bank. Before. Everything that we see happening to the Palestinians in Gaza has been happening to Palestinians in the West Bank and Palestinian citizens of Israel at the same time. They have also had their water cut off. They have also had their electricity cut off. They have also been denied freedom of movement. They have also been denied civil rights. They have also had institutionalized racism imposed against them, dehumanization, and calls from the Israeli public for a transfer of Palestinian citizens of Israel. Same language, same dehumanization. The hate that the Israelis have spewed against the Palestinians in Gaza, they have used the same language against Palestinian citizens in Israel and against the Palestinians in the West Bank. And I say the Israelis, and I'm not generalizing. I wish I were generalizing and I could be accused of conducting stereotypes. 95% of the Israelis supported the offensive against the Gaza population. 95%. When we speak of a peace movement in Israel, I have to say, where is it? It's so small. It's the equivalent of the leftist socialist movement in the United States. I say this as a leftist socialist in the United States. We have to recognize also that we don't have a so-called truce right now. We have a 72-hour ceasefire. And what is being demanded of Hamas by, and I'm very ashamed to say, not just the Israeli government, but by the Egyptian government, by the Saudi government, by the Emirati government. We have traitors in the Arab world. Supported by the US government and unfortunately supported by Mahmoud Abbas, who for God's sakes we should stop calling the president because his term expired years ago. Okay. All of these individuals are calling for the disarming of Hamas as a condition to lifting the siege. And Netanyahu has gone forward so far as to say he will only let in building material if Hamas disarms. So if the Palestinian resistance denies their own right for defense and protection, then they will get some material to allow them to rebuild their homes, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. This is not a condition. This is actually a violation of the Geneva Convention. So it brings us to a critical question. What are we going to do about it? And how are we going to do what needs to be done? And I think what's critical here is for us to know what it is that we're demanding and then know how to get there. And we really, really need to demand the full human rights of the Palestinians, which means if the tables were turned, if we were actually the terrorists, and I'm using that word again legally, if we were actually the terrorists and we had destroyed the infrastructure in Israel and killed 1% of their population in 29 days, which is how many of us they have killed in Gaza, to 1%, okay? what would have been the cry from the so-called international community? There'd be an uproar. Yeah. But somehow killing people of color is way cool. It's acceptable. We are demanding an arms embargo on the state of Israel. They are calling for disarming Hamas. I'm like, hell no. We first disarm the criminals. You don't disarm the defenders. So we're asking for an arms embargo on the state of Israel. And this may be asking too much, you say. No, I think this is the time. Because guess what happened in 24 hours? In 24 hours, we had the UK and Spain go, I don't feel comfortable selling weapons to the Israelis anymore. Spain has now looked upon all the weapons transfers to Israel. Now, Spain gives less than 1% to the Israeli military, but nevertheless, it's a very important political position. So asking for an arms embargo is not asking for the impossible, it's asking for the reasonable. We're also asking for sanctions to be placed on the state of Israel. Sanctions. They have committed crimes. They should pay. And again, is this asking too much? Well, earlier last week, the foreign minister from Finland said that sanctions against Israel must be on the table. It must be an option. Now, he said that during the bombardment, but it still should be an option, because if you kill 1,900 people, you should pay. You should pay. We're asking for criminals to be tried. That means we're asking for the International Criminal Court, and we're asking for the International Court of Justice. This is how we hold Israel accountable. This is how we protect the Palestinians from this happening in another 2 years. This is the fourth assault against Palestinians in Gaza in 9 years. The fourth. And each time it has gotten more intensive, each time it has gotten more barbaric, and each time the siege has been tightened on Gaza. So we're asking for the International Criminal Court, the arms embargo, and the sanctions. And by the way, when I say arms embargo, Amnesty International is asking for the same thing. Amnesty International is not that leftist, most radical and revolutionary organizations. Again, these demands are getting to be more mainstream. We need to make them more mainstream. We also need to be meeting and protesting and getting as angry about the siege as we are angry about the weapons and the bombardment. We need to be as angry. That means the organization and the energy that you brought today, you need to magnify it to end the criminal siege on Gaza. And I say criminal because it has been defined by independent jurists who are part of the United Nations as criminal, as illegal. We need it to be removed unconditionally by land, air, and sea. That means the airport in Gaza needs to be rebuilt. I'm not going to depend on the Egyptians to get stuff into Gaza. I'm not going to depend on the Israelis to get stuff into Gaza. You know how many truckloads of food the Egyptians let past in 29 days? Truckloads. Truckloads. 4. We need to end the impunity that is afforded to the state of Israel. The impunity, I'll give you some examples here. The Palestinian Center for Human Rights opened 477 cases of criminal behavior. Most of them were tossed out. And Israel decided to give a 7-month prison sentence to one soldier who stole a credit card. And it decided to give a suspended sentence to soldiers who used children as human shields, and a suspended sentence to an individual for the misuse of a firearm that killed a woman. So theft of a credit card by the Israeli government is viewed as more damaging than the killing and the injuring of Palestinian souls. We need to reaffirm something very critically in our language. We are not Gazans. We are not West Bankers. We are Palestinians. That means Gaza is part of Palestine. That means everything that the Israelis are doing in Gaza, they are doing elsewhere. We need to affirm it in our language. And when we affirm it in our language, we clarify what we want. That means we are not only asking for an end of the criminal siege, we're asking for an end of the occupation in totality. An end of all the occupation, which includes Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is under occupation. We're also asking for an end of apartheid. And I use that word again, not out of vehemence, like we use a lot of words, but legally, there is something called a crime of apartheid. And I want to tell you exactly how we define the crime of apartheid. It is defined as having policies that, quote, have the purpose of establishing and maintaining domination by one racial group or persons over any other racial group or persons, and systematically oppressing them, in particular by means such as segregation, expropriation of land, denial of the right to leave, denial of